Hi, I'm Paul. I'm super excited to share with you a bit about what I know about service design. And thanks to everyone at the Service Design Digital Summit for giving me this opportunity. I am a solution lead at VMware Pivotal Labs. Pivotal Labs is a software consultancy. It's been around building great products with clients and teaching agile, lean, and user-centered practices for over 25 years. I came to Pivotal a little over 5 years ago to manage the growing product design team in our New York City office. Now I'm more focused on helping our clients get the most out of all of our services. I've always really enjoyed pitching the value of design to technical audiences. And in my current role, I'm responsible for pitching and running projects more holistically, where all of our practices like product design, product management, engineering, and data science are involved. But at the end of the day, I call myself a designer, and it's how I see the world. People have asked me what type of designer I am, and I've always really struggled with that question. Product designer has always felt like kind of the best answer, but eventually I've landed on calling myself a service designer. I really love digging into problem spaces and understanding the complex level of environmental constraints and pressures that determine whether or not a product will be successful. Someone once joked when I gave that answer that it just meant I'm a designer that's not good at fonts and colors, which I beg to differ. So here's what I want to talk about today. A little bit about VMware Pivotal Labs. I want to tell you a story about service design in action. I want to talk about how we use service design methods in our approach to discovery. I want to talk about what it means to be a stakeholder or a sponsor for teams that are using these service design methods and what some of the pitfalls might be. And I wanted to dive into a technique we use all the time called the service blueprint. It's a powerful foundational technique. I want to show you how we do it so you can go do it yourself. So a bit about VMware Pivotal Labs. We help our clients in two main areas: how they go about doing product development, the practices that they bring to designing and building apps, and how they build, run, and manage their apps, the platform that the apps run on. So today I'm going to talk about the stuff on the left here, the applications and the practices that teams use to design and build them. So we design and build amazing software with our clients. And we typically have two responsibilities in the context of those projects. One is to ship great products, and the other is to teach them modern software development practices so that they can carry these practices forward far beyond after Pivotal Labs is involved. On some projects, we just deliver for our client, but the real sweet spot for us is when we're delivering and teaching all together. And for us, it's all about finding where the value is and shipping that to production often. And it's in that finding the value bit where we leverage a lot of service design practices. So I want to kick us off with a story. This is a story about service design in action. It comes from an app we built in the UK for the largest ever clinical study for early detection of a certain type of cancer. The app was going to be for healthcare practitioners as they were tracking patients that were going through this clinical study. And it was a classic design problem, right? Many users, many different parties, concerned parties, all these users and concerned parties had all these different and interconnected needs. There was the client who we were working very closely with to build the app. There was the National Health Service. There were three different types of healthcare professional personas in the mix. And then of course, there was the patients, the people we were trying to help. In the beginning, there was some tension and pressure that maybe we should just be focusing on the software part. That the rest around how the software connected to the overall trial and all the other complex things in the ecosystem was either someone else's responsibility or it would just kind of somehow take care of itself. But some of the team members were concerned about that. They felt that all this other stuff was important and it would help give shape to what the software needed to do to be successful. We were sensing that there were some big risky assumptions that we were struggling to clearly articulate within this complex ecosystem. So while there was some skepticism, there was also a lot of trust. So we got a commitment from the team and the client to go out and do a service blueprint. I'm going to do a deep dive into what a service blueprint is a little later in this talk. The team's goal in this situation was to identify how everyone in the ecosystem was going to work together and give names and descriptions to our assumptions about how the system was going to work and decide what we were going to do next. So the team went through this service blueprint process, and this one risky assumption kept coming up, which was we were assuming that the screening would take each patient about 15 minutes, and this was critical to the design of the whole trial. We needed to know how many screenings we could do per day, per week, and per year. And if we were wrong about this, it would mean that we had to make some fundamental changes to how we were going about it. So we identified this as really risky. We wanted to go test it. So we recruited 10 target patients and had them participate in all the stuff around the screening, as well as like a mock screening. The patients knew this was a fake. And what we were trying to get at, like, not only what the software needed to do to facilitate the screening, but what were all the other things that were happening around it that would give shape to what the software had to do. Things like, did the people arrive on time? What was the intake and process like once they showed up at the building? And how much support and explanation did patients need after the screening? So what we found is our assumption was actually pretty wrong. It wasn't a 15-minute to do the screening. It was more like more on the scale of like 40 minutes. So this funding fundamentally changed how the trial was structured, as well as what the app needed to do to make the process around the screening smoother. Fast forward, the software and the clinical trial were successful, and we're quite proud of the work we did here. The study literally saved lives. So with that story, let's dive into discovery and the goals and activities that we do within it. I'm sure many of you have seen this double diamond diagram before. At VMware Pivotal Labs, we call this process discovery and framing, or sometimes we call it a navigator. As a software consultancy, we're usually building digital products, but we use a lot of service design techniques as we move through discovery and framing. We want to make sure we're defining and prioritizing the problems we're going to solve first, and then, and only then, testing the solutions that fit. By defining the problem first, we're forced to align around what really matters and to define what a successful solution will really look like. So let's dive in to see what's happening in each of those two big diamonds there. So our goal in discovery is to define and prioritize the problems we're going to solve based on the user context, business context, and the technical context. We need to think of how we're approaching those things in concert, right? Like, we don't want to be designing things that users want that aren't driving the business outcomes, or designing things that user wants that are too complex to actually build. There needs to be conversation between all the constraints within those three domains. And we need to learn what we need to learn in order to get aligned and confident. We know what the problems are and the context that those problems live in. So we do a lot of user interviews and synthesis in this stage. Synthesis is important to bring what we've learned back to the team in a way that everyone can understand. We often do service blueprints in the discovery as well. I'm going to dive a bit deeper into what that is later. Another tool that we use is called an actors map. It's a way to visualize how value is being created for all the different participants in an ecosystem. It's usually represented as like concentric circles, or like a network diagram where you have nodes and connections. But it usually starts with the most directly impacted users in the center and all the related users or actors radiating out from there. A user journey map is like a storyboard of the user's experience with a product or service. It's less about understanding the underlying systems and more focused on what the user's actual experience is from. And typically, this is informed by user research. So ultimately, we need to define and prioritize the problems we're going to solve using these techniques. So we have techniques for articulating the problems and creating frameworks for prioritization as well. And often during this phase, there's a lot of technical discovery to do too around what are the technical constraints and pressures that are going to be put on the team. So at the end of discovery, what we should have is a list of clearly articulated problems and a prioritization of which ones are more important. That allows us to move into framing. In framing, we're rapidly creating solutions and testing them, and then iterating on our tests based on what we learn. As in the case with the clinical trial, we're testing the software and all the factors around the software that influence it. It's always good to refine your personas and user and service blueprint as you enter into framing. A lot of good ideas are going to come out of framing, and we want to make sure we're aligned on what problem we're actually solving, and that we have that well articulated. Design studios are a great way to get everyone's ideas out of their head and onto paper. It's great to get everyone sketching, product managers, engineers, stakeholders, everyone. Get everything, get all the best ideas out of everyone's head, get them on paper. And as the designer, you can that's like a lot of great stuff you can take and pick the best stuff to put into your prototypes. It's also a great way to get aligned on what's important and what isn't. You know, but when engineers start to draw things, you start to get a sense of the things that they're concerned about from a complexity standpoint. Then it's time to move into an iterative cycle of prototyping, testing, and refining. this is the part I really enjoy, because it's always great when a team gets in a cadence of like building a prototype in the morning and testing it in the afternoon, and then learning a bunch of stuff and iterating on the prototype and doing the same thing the next day. It's really exciting, and you really get to see things moving fast. But because the goal here is that you want to move fast, so it's important to keep an eye on getting the right fidelity on your prototype. My colleague Eric likes to say the fidelity of your prototype should reflect your confidence. What he means there is the less sure you are in the approach you've taken, the lower fidelity your prototype should take. You should only increase the fidelity as your confidence increases. So if you're building a digital product within the service, the engineers are also working at this time to set up all the environments and things, making decisions about languages and frameworks so that they can start building. A note on doing discovery together. While this work is typically facilitated by a product manager or a designer, it's really important that the team do this as a whole. It's really important that we get engineers out into the field to do user research with us, and we get engineers doing sketching. It's really, inversely, it's important that designers start to have the conversations about technical complexity, because that's going to have an influence on the quality of the things we release. It's really important that the whole team align around discovery and bring their own sets of expertise to the party. A powerful result of doing discovery together is that a team will start to align around a common language and start to align around why certain things are more important than others. This means they'll communicate better, make better decisions faster, and not relitigate little things over and over again. Teams go as fast as they can make a decision, and this type of alignment is priceless when the team starts to execute. This screenshot here is what collaboration looks like for us now. This is a designer and a developer going over a design and having that conversation about like, this is what we're hearing from the users and why the app should work this way. And the engineer saying, well, yeah, that's a good, I understand that, but this is why this is complex and why we may want to find a simpler way of doing it. So the designers and devs are still working in their respective tools, and we're doing a lot of collaboration over Zoom. The point is we want to maintain the rate of collaboration and reduce the friction of collaboration, so we're still keeping each other on the same page and staying aligned on things, even though we're in this world where everyone's working remote. So back to discovery. After framing, the team should have confidence in their direction and have picked a clear place to start. The team should be ready to build the product or start implementing the service. And as the team iterates, the discovery never really ends. During this kind of the two big diamonds here, we should have answered many of the existential questions about what we're building. Like, should we even build it? Why? What should it do? But there's always more to learn, especially as the app starts to increase in fidelity. There's always more to learn as we start building the product, as we start releasing the product, and as we get real feedback from real users using it out in the real world. And a quick note on the mood and morale of the team through this process. Typically, a team starts off really optimistic and excited. It's a whole world of possibilities. We're going to learn so much. It's a really exciting time when you're kicking off a discovery. But as you start to go through discovery, you start to uncover problems and constraints, and you don't yet have any real answers to them. So you start to get a little anxious, and this is natural. It's purposeful. But you have a pile of problems on your desk, and you don't yet know how you're going to solve them. That pile gets bigger every day. So it's natural that you're going to feel a little anxious at this point. But then during framing, you start to make these solutions real. Things start to get more tangible. The solutions really start to take form, and you start to get feedback from your users that you're starting to really hone in on the thing that they want. So the team starts to feel more confident in anxiety lessons. So it's helpful to expect this, right? I call that anxious moment in the middle, like the pit of despair. It can be really helpful to articulate that this is going to happen, but it doesn't make it any less uncomfortable. Teams need to learn to lean into this discomfort a little bit, because we're doing it on purpose early. We don't want to feel this discomfort when we're a couple weeks away from launching the service. We want to get all this stuff out of the way early. But if you're a manager, a stakeholder, or a sponsor, it's going to be really important that you help the team navigate this phase. And so, pulling on that thread, I want to talk a bit about stakeholders and sponsors and things they can do to help teams be successful through a discovery process. So as I said previously, supporting teams that are navigating uncertainty is inherently tricky. So I want to talk about some of the pitfalls that live at the extremes of how I've seen folks approach this. On one end, there's command and control. This is the need to create a schedule and stick to it. The need to know everything up front and learn on a schedule. I see this approach in many engineering-focused cultures, where discovery and design is seen as a fixed phase that's like the blocker to the important building stuff part. The main question I hear that with folks that are oriented over here is when will it be done? And the problem here is that the team, well, in order to answer that question, the team needs to predict the future and know now what they don't know. And people are typically bad at that, so they're usually wrong. Or even worse, if they document a plan and stick to it, they may miss some learning opportunities and land on solutions that feel right but won't actually work. On the other end of the spectrum is the disengaged stakeholder. They usually really value discovery work and they don't want to be the command and control person, but they haven't yet found the tools to support the team any other way. I often see this with people that enjoy this type of work, but maybe new to supporting it. And the thing I often hear from people that are oriented towards this side is, let the process work. I don't want to influence what the team is learning. And the problem with this is that the team doesn't feel enough urgency driving the work. The risk is that discovery goes on way too long and the process of learning feels really squishy. The team may be validating things that they don't need to, or maybe revalidating things that they already know. So what does good look like? How do you get to a place where you're not living at either one of these extremes? How do you get to a place where the team is empowered to own the process and drive it, but are accountable to the outcomes that you've set for them? And here are some thoughts on that. Number one, as a stakeholder or a sponsor of a project, stay engaged. Let the team know that this work is important and valuable. You're going to be investing money, time, and effort based on what the team is learning here. There are stakes. Make sure the team knows what those stakes are and be opinionated about what they're working on. Challenge them to time box. Challenge them about the methods they're using, but ultimately let them decide what they work on day to day. Time boxing is a really valuable thing. Expect the team to start to put time boxes on things, but leave room for plans to change. Learning is really linear. The act of learning is rarely linear or predictable. So it's okay to make those predictions, but you're going to need to change them as you learn new things. And lastly, as a stakeholder or a sponsor to a project, ask good questions. When is it going to be done is a hard question, and it often doesn't drive good conversations. But questions like these can drive really helpful conversations. Like, what's the riskiest thing you're seeing right now? And how can we make that less risky? At weekly check-ins with the teams I work with, one of the questions I always ask is, what have you learned this week? And what do you need to learn? And how are you going to go about learning that? And then when will you know you've learned enough to be confident in a direction? I think that's a great substitute for when will you be done, but when will you get the signals that you've learned enough to pick a direction and be confident in it? And also, what bets are you willing to make? Like, what are the things that we don't know, but we think are so low risk that we can just make a decision about those things and assume them to be true at a relatively low risk? And also, like, what if we're wrong about that bet? Is the risk of us being wrong too high? And is it worth spending the time to validate now? So next up, I want to dive a bit into a service blueprint, which is a technique we use a lot at Pivotal Labs. So why do you do a service blueprint? The goal, from my perspective, is alignment. We want to be explicit about what we know and what we don't know and get the team on the same page. We're going to map the components of the system and how they're related and stay aligned on these relationships so we're all pulling in the same direction. I like to do this exercise fairly early in engagement, sometimes on day 1 or 2. So there's so much we don't know at this point. So it's going to be filled with assumptions, and that's okay, as long as we call them out as assumptions and discuss how we're going to go validate them. It typically takes about 2 hours, but it'll take longer if the system is more complex. If it's taking too much longer than that, it might be a sign that you should look at shrinking the scope and mandate of the team. And the whole team should be there. Core team, engineers, designers, product managers, they should all be there. The stakeholders should be there too. If alignment is what we're after, we should do it early and with all the important people. All right, so what is it? It's your journeys through a service or product. It's a user-centered technique. It breaks the journey down into component parts and identifies important dependencies and interactions. It forces alignment about what the user's journey is, what the system is that supports it, what all the pieces are, and how they're related so the team can confidently get aligned on what's important and how they're going to move forward. So to start, Make some columns that describe the steps of the user's journey through the process. What happens first? In the clinical trial example, the patient had to drive to the clinic and park. And we needed to kind of like start to have conversations about like, well, had they been there before? Do they know how to get there? And then the next step in the process was they had to check in, and on and on. There were all these steps to the process. So all along the tops of the columns, you want to capture all the relevant steps. The rows are the things that we want to delve into at each step, the levels of interaction. So we tend to use a format that looks something like this. For each one of the steps in the process, describe the physical evidence. What does the user see first? What are they interacting with? Are they picking up the phone and calling someone? Or are they using an app on a smartphone? Or are they at a desktop computer? What is it that they're actually interacting with? Next, for each step, we want to articulate the customer actions. What action do they do to access the service? What do they need? And then what do they need to accomplish to get to the next step in the process? Next, we want to describe for each step the front page. How is the service visibly delivered? What is the user seeing? What is the user seeing what is the feedback the user needs to get to give them confidence they can move on to the next step? Then there's the backstage. What helps make the service happen? What are the things that are supporting the front stage so that the user can move on to the next step? The user typically doesn't see what's going on in the backstage, but these are the important things that are supporting what's going on in the front stage. And then there are other touch points. What needs to happen in order for the backstage to receive this information? So the team will kind of map out all the steps and then map out describe all these things within each step, and then step back and start to have a conversation about some things. What they want to have, what we tend to encourage folks to do is step back and have conversations about all the things that are happening at steps and start to circle the things that are risky. What are the things that we've made assumptions about that we need to explore further, or are risky for other reasons? Like maybe there's a service that the user's experience relies on that is frequently not available or unstable. Let's call that out and circle it. So we'll probably want to learn more about that. We want to identify points of pain for the user and points of delight. Because we're going to be designing the user's experience through this service, let's define the points at which they're happy and the points at which they're finding they're less than happy. Let's identify the points where the user has reached their goal. And let's identify the points where there are things we want to measure. And those two things are usually related. And let's have a conversation about the scope. As we step back, is this overall system too massive for one team? Or is there another team that's already taking care of parts of the system? Let's define those boundaries and figure out where our dependencies are on other teams. And what you might wind up with maybe looks something like this. In the story I told earlier, the 15-minute screening length was one of the assumptions. So we circled that in red. It's good to have this as a living document so that the team updates it when they learn new things. It's also good to have this available to everyone in the team. So when the team is having kind of conversations about some of the complexities of these interactions, they have an artifact they can rally around to say, this is what I'm talking about. For a lot of teams now, it's like a bookmark of a mural board that they go to and say, when this comes over to this, they're having trouble kind of rationalizing how that interaction is going to happen. At the time we were all sharing the same space, it would be hung up on a wall, and we would just say, I want to figure out like where the complexity is from here and how it's related to that over there. It's a really great way to drive conversations among teammates. So that's an introduction to our approaches to service design at VMware Pivotal Labs. Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to get a free consultation or bounce some ideas off of one of our practitioners, or maybe get help solving what's keeping you up at night, you can reach us at the link below there. Thanks again, and have a great day.